Are we good to go? Okay. Hello, everyone. I appreciate everyone coming out to the webinar. My name is Charles Carpenter. I'll be your MC and moderator today. I'm a graduate student at Kansas State studying horticulture with the emphasis in urban food systems. So today we'll be discussing climate change's impacts on urban agriculture. So about the series, the Gaining Ground webinar is organized by the Urban Food System graduate student cohort. So everyone in Zoom land, please give a round of applause to all the Urban Food Systems students who created this. We had to create the flyers, find the panelists, the speakers, and everything. So I just want to give a lot of appreciation to the students as well as the faculty with Simra, Dr. Jenkins, as well as Dr. Pliaconi for making all of this happen. Next, this webinar series is to provide agriculture educators with the tools and skills to better support urban food system enterprises. Topics will focus on tools or skills that support urban food system enterprises and programs. And this was funded by the North Central SARE Professional Development Program under the project title Capacity Building in Urban Food Systems in the North Central Region. So our webinar schedule will go like this. First will be introductions, which what are we doing right now, or the introductions. Two will be the keynote speaker, Dr. Dorsey. Followed by that, we'll have the guided discussion with the panelists from Urbavore Farms. We have Brooke. Young Family Farms, we have Alana Young, as well as Global One Urban Farms with Star. And then followed by that, we'll have Q&A with the audience. And if you do have questions, please put it in the Q&A box. This is a feature I just realized and I learned recently. So use the Q&A box if you have questions for the panelists, as well as Dr. Dorsey. So our Gaining Ground panelists is Urbavore Farms. We have Brooke and Dan. Young Family Farms, like I mentioned, Alana Young, and Global One Farms with Anthony and Star. And our phenomenal keynote speaker, we have Dr. Joseph Dorsey from University of South Florida. He's the Associate Dean for Academic Affairs and Director of Food Sustainability and Security. With no further ado, I'll allow Dr. Dorsey to speak. I'm passing the imaginary mic to you, and I'll allow you to talk about climate change and urban agriculture.
Okay, thank you very much, Charles. So I guess I should share my screen at this point, right? To get started. Let's see.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, there we go. Screen one. Oh, okay. Share it.
We see it.
All right, got you. All right, thank you for inviting me to be a part of this webinar. A little bit about my background before I get started. I got my bachelor's in human nutrition and food from Howard University. And when I graduated, I joined the Peace Corps, and I was in West Africa for 2 years working with malnourished children and their families. And then some years later, I ended up in the U.S. Virgin Islands, working in St. Croix with the WIC program around women, infants, and children. So early in my career, I was working in maternal and child care. Got my doctorate from the University of Michigan, focusing on environmental justice. And now that I'm here at the University of South Florida, I have sort of revived my food, background, my nutrition background, and directing our food sustainability and security concentration at the college. So, advance. Why is it not advanced? Oh, there we go. Okay, so what is agriculture? I'm going to run through this quickly because I know I have other speakers. But agriculture, is basically growing plants and animals as food, as a sort of renewable commodity, which requires the acquisition and the utilization of various resources, soil, air, and water, and sunlight, and which creates production of crops or animals, and then that's processed, packaged, distributed, and consumed by us. And at some point, there's a disposal and waste. And so there's a lot of stages to what agriculture is about. But it's become a very large system over the years. It's now a global food system. We can talk about the agricultural production of large scale production with machinery. Now we fertilizers and pesticides and genetic modification of our food supply. It's very business orientated. We have the supermarket networks and high volume production. There's also connections with government through policies and politics, as well as subsidies and aspects of economic development that are tied into agriculture. And also, of course, the multinational corporations that have this global reach as far as creating food systems for profit and maximization, and also dominate the marketplace. Supposed to do, well, I'm supposed to do more of that animation stuff. But anyway, we have resources that go into agriculture. Of course, energy is a resource that is needed, as well as water, which is the topic that we're going to talk probably more a little bit about later. Of course, we use water in all kinds of ways, not just to grow agriculture. Water is very important for our economic system, our health and well-being, but it also can be wasted in many ways. And of course, land, another important resource that is now, we have a lot of urbanization that's taken over, erosion of topsoil, so these resources are limited and are being used for not just agriculture, but of course for residential, transportation, all kinds of other uses. Now, we live in a world where we have at least over 7 billion people. And remember, everybody needs to eat. And so food is something that everyone needs on a daily basis. All of us understand what happens if you don't eat for several hours. You start to feel that churning in your stomach saying, hey, I need to eat something. And so it's something we do every day. But with all people that need to eat and then the limited resources that we have to produce food, we have to look at issues of food security. And hunger and drought and food shortages are things that can threaten that over time. And the biggest culprit, I think, right now is climate change. Because if you think about agriculture, that started over 10,000 years ago, it came after I guess you could say interglacial periods where, the earth started warming up, the ice caps melted, and the earth became, in a condition that was favorable to now creating settlements around crops and food. So for 10,000 years, we've been relying on sort of a sort of balanced climate, and weather and so forth. But those patterns are now being threatened by our current system, which is creating, what we talk about global warming as part of that, the heating up of the planet from greenhouse gases starting to warm up the atmosphere, and this can cause what we call climate change. And a lot of what climate change involves is extreme events, which means that the weather, the problems are coming more frequently and more intense. So, for example, flooding. That can come from overdevelopment rather, soil erosion, excess rainfall, and causes sea levels to rise. And part of that has to do with that soil erosion because that, plants hold the soil in place. And when you have soil erosion, it kind of washes away very quickly. The opposite could be droughts, where you don't have as much rain. The fresh water can evaporate into to the atmosphere. You can have salt water intrusion, like we have here in Florida with, the karst, kind of geography we have, where, as they suck the fresh water out of the ground, the salt water starts to come in and that causes a lot of, you've probably heard of these sinkholes that we have, where there's these, pockets of where, water comes coming in under the earth. Deforestation, of course, is part of that, cutting down on the, oxygen and moisture that the trees supply to the atmosphere, and as well as our monoculture irrigation, which, uses tremendous amount of water that can also cause runoff. We know it's about forest fires that have been taking place because of the drying conditions on the planet, as well as big storms, hurricanes, and tornadoes. And all of these become, like I said, more frequent and intense because of the climate change. And it can also have, of course, negative impacts on crop yields as well. I'm not going to go into this map too much, but the areas that are in red are the more driest areas that are being more affected by climate change. And those areas, of course, are going to have problems with producing food over time. So greenhouse gas emissions I just want to kind of show a little pie chart here of where the source of greenhouse gas emissions can affect our food choices. And you can see the largest one is 30% comes from the production of red meat. I know a lot of people like that, but we have to kind of start understanding we have to change our diets as well in order to make sure that we don't continue to use up tremendous amounts of water as well as produce a lot of greenhouse gases. Um, Also snacks and oils and things like that. But none of that might come from packaging and various things when we, have processing of food. Uh, let's see. So what are addressing these future challenges? I think a lot of us are beginning to understand that urban-based solutions are important. Rural agriculture, of course, is not going to go away, but as I said earlier, because of climate change, it's going to be much more difficult to have that consistency of growing outside. If you don't have enough sunlight, or too much sunlight, of course you can, burn up the plants, or, too much rain causes the flooding, not enough rain causes drought. And so we're going to start to look at the cities as places where we can start to produce more food. And so there are various ways that we can focus on that, and that'll be kind of where I'm going to go with the rest of the presentation in a few minutes. So why is urban-based solutions? This graph here shows population growth over time, starting around the 1950s. The lighter brown is the urban percentage of population, and the darker is the rural. And as you can see, in the 1950s, about 30% of urban people lived in the cities, and about 70% was in the rural. But over the decades, through the 60s and 70s, you can see that more people in the world have migrated to the cities. And really, it came to around 2000 where we saw that shift where they were, well, no, more 2010, the shift where you had more people living in the cities of about over 50%. And it's increased to around currently over 60% of our populations are living in urban environments. So, and I guess they don't have a graph here yet, but I can assume that this is only going to continue. And so if we're going to have so many people living in the urban environments, food production makes kind of sense. You don't have to necessarily transport food from the rural areas into the cities if we're producing it there. Less energy production or energy use, and also more local accessibility. So urban agriculture, I think, is an important component. These slides are fairly visual. There's not a lot to say, but it gives you a sense of what it would look like, what it looks like now, and what it would continue to look like if we, embrace urban agriculture as a way of assuring food security within the cities and so forth. We've got community gardens. There's going to be some representation talking about that in a few minutes. And so I think part of this is looking at the children. I picked pictures which I felt brought children in because they're the future, and they're the ones we have to sort of train and nurture to look at food as not something they don't just buy from a supermarket, but something that we can grow, teaches them patience and caring and sort of marketable skills, and also a sense of satisfaction that they produced it themselves. So there's other things we can look at, such as rooftop gardens. So it's basically about space. We can find spaces and places to grow food. It doesn't have to be in your horizontal fields out there in rural areas. We can find places in the cities to produce food as well. And as I said before, I think a good linkage is with the school systems too. The more we have children learn about urban farming, then it becomes part of their lifestyle. And I think that's kind of an important way to look at urban agriculture as we move forward. And as I said before, because of climate change, it's going to be more difficult to have a secure food supply. And so I'm looking at controlled environment agriculture as probably the way we need to go. It's kind of an adaptation. Since we can't maybe change climate change because it's starting to happen, we can't say it doesn't happen, but what are we going to do about it? And part of it is, yes, we try to cut down on our greenhouse gas emissions, but a lot of the damage has already been done. Gases that have went out decades, ago are still in the atmosphere. So one of the things we have to really consider is adaptation, and how do we control our environments. And so we're going to have to look at certain things such as, what I call geoponics is the idea of drip irrigation. And that would be a way of making sure that the water just goes to the roots. Because if you look, sometimes you're driving through the rural areas and you can see these big fields where they're like throwing water all over the place to irrigate. A lot of that water doesn't get to the roots or it goes into the atmosphere. If you really want to conserve water, it's being more precise and bringing water to just where the root structure is. And this is one approach that we can, have as far as conservation of water. Hydroponics I actually did my master's degree work on hydroponic technology because when I was doing my Peace Corps service, I noticed, I traveled to parts of Africa, the dry parts like Mali, saw the Sahel region near the Sahara Desert, and saw this dryness and how there was so little vegetation there. And when I became aware of hydroponic technology, I said, well, if this is something that could be transferable to developing world and other dry and semi-arid areas, as long as it's self-contained and you recirculate the water, the plants grow more quickly, you keep out pest and disease, you can control the climate. It does requires a lot of energy and a lot of monitoring of the system. But over time, it's one of those, I guess, supplemental systems what we can use to make sure that we can assure our food supply within, a climate uncertainty that we see coming through. Another one is aeroponics, which is it's similar to hydroponics, where hydroponics is mostly just water with nutrients in it flowing over the root structure. The aeroponics creates a mist, so it uses even less water it just bathes the roots. And so inside, as you can see up here, if I can move this in, you see that there's the roots in here, and the water is nutrients is misty. And the thing about growing plants, you really only need several things. And you need a light source, which is usually the sun, but we can simulate that. You need water, and you need nutrients, and you need something to hold the roots in place. And so this idea that you can only grow outside in soil is not true. There's other ways we can do it, and we may be forced to do it more if we don't pay attention to signs of soil erosion and climate change. The other thing is aquaponics, where you combine plants and fish and create a sort of an ecosystem where there's symbiotic relationships, where the poop becomes nutrients for the plants filter the water, becomes a sort of a circular system where we produce proteins as well as green leafy vegetables and so forth. And so this is kind of the idea of vertical farming. I'm sure people have heard of that. Traditionally, as I said before, we think of farming as a horizontal process where you need land, you need a lot of land to do this, but really to grow, you need space. And so you can kind of stack plants now if you're thinking about the idea of vertical farming. And so these are some images. There was actually a book that was written by Professor Dixon Das Premier, about this whole idea of how this could be one of the technologies which will, secure our food supply. And I'm looking at this artist rendition here, and this is my feeling of that. If you can imagine a world in the future where we have these, instead of high-rise buildings that are condos for people, that we have these high-rise buildings downtown that are sort of urban cluster food supply centers. Where people can live there maybe are the ones who work with the plants. You could have layers of, fruit on one level, vegetables, flowers. You could have all these different layers of food production and people living there. And then on the bottom floor, you can imagine having restaurants and cafes and shops where the food that's being produced in the building is what people are eating. And you could imagine even having trucks that go out to neighborhoods taking foods out there from these urban centers. So, and of course, it could be supplied powered by solar energy, wind energy, and so forth. So this is my vision of a future that we can have if we really put the political and economic will into making it happen. Things such as green walls, they do exist. Another way of sort of lowering the temperature of the urban, we call it heat islands. beautifying the, the inner cities. And even these are things that could be done within, someone's even house. It doesn't have to be large scale. These can be small scale. So maybe really growing plants is about space, finding the spaces to grow. Pretty much, this is I think my last slide here. I think there was a term called ecological cities that years ago we used to talk about, and it hasn't been talked about much recently. But I think it's a term that should still be considered something we should aspire to. The idea of logical, I like the idea of eco, it means basically home in Greek, ecos and so forth. In ecosystems, it's about our home, the planet. But also we want to have the idea of logical too, the logic that we're doing things, we're thinking this through. So I always feel like the idea of an ecological city is that we do what's logical, it makes sense. And greening the city and making it a place where we have parks and gardens, and making it more livable and more sustainable with alternative energy sources and water supplies that are recirculated and nutrients that are recirculated. All of these things will make our survival as humans much more important. I tell my students all the time that the earth would go on without us. Sustainability is not about the ecosystem, it's about us as humans doing the right things to be in balance with the ecosystem. So with that, I'll say if we can move towards having more ecological cities where we focus on urban agriculture and other things that make our lives much more livable and sustainable, we will definitely survive into the 21st century and beyond. And I thank you for your time and interest, and I end my presentation here. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Dorsey, for your presentation and helping us understand climate change and how urban agriculture can mitigate some of the challenges that climate change might show us in the future. More than anything, I just want to appreciate your time and thank you for presenting today.
You're welcome.
Some of the things that you said with water conservation, I kind of want to gear it to our panelists. I know Brooke and Alana have some amazing things and possibly Star as well has some amazing water conservation techniques that they use on their farm. I know we have some urban farms here today. Brooke, I know you have a presentation. Could you possibly share with us some of your techniques on water conservation? Because one thing I heard that was interesting about your farm was that you don't use irrigation at your farm. And then Alana, next, if you want to respond, for the floor is yours.
Sounds good. You're muted, Brooke.
Okay, you guys can hear me now? Yeah? Okay, so I have a presentation that I've made, not for this talk specifically, but it's more about our no-till farming systems in general at Urbavore, because we get a lot of questions about that. But no-till farming is all about water conservation. So I'm going to kind of run through my slides, but try to really focus on the water piece specifically. I'm going to share my screen now, guys. Let's see. All right. Can you guys see it?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Is there like a weird thing in front of it? Let's see. Okay, well, if you guys can see it, we're gonna go for it. Okay, good. So, well, first off, my name is Brooke, and I've been an urban farmer for, gosh, since I was 24 years old. I'm almost 42. This is the only thing I've ever done. I've made a living at it full time, the whole time, which is crazy. But my partner, Dan, and I have one of the largest, longest standing urban farms in Kansas City. And we are on 13 and a half acres over on the east side of town, kind of near Swope Park. And when we started out, we were just crazy environmentalists, very idealistic people in our 20s. And we had no money, but we had a big vision for sustainability and for ecological cities and all of those things. And when we created our farm, it was on completely raw land. There was nothing here. So no water, no electricity, no infrastructure, nothing, no fencing. And we really had no choice but to be simple and ecological about how we were doing things, like not irrigating our fields, because even if we had wanted to ignore the whole philosophy of water conservation, we couldn't have afforded to put in drip irrigation. It was going to cost us $20,000 just to tie into the city's water. So you can imagine, you know, a couple kids in their late 20s trying to build this farm from scratch. So in the early days here, you know, we had no water, no infrastructure, no electricity, and we had to create systems to grow food within that were successful somehow. So this picture is of Dan, my partner. Probably this is our first year on the site, and he's got a baby strapped to his back, and you see him with this spade in his hand, and we're literally chipping away at rock hard clay soil, attempting to plant garlic into it. This is the fall. There's like some dead okra stalks on the side of the field there, and we're digging each individual garlic planting hole because we couldn't even take a tool and make a furrow in the soil at this point. The field we're farming in was actually a baseball diamond. So it's been a long process of building soil and learning to farm without water. But deep straw mulch has kind of been the foundation of our no-till farming. And when I say no-till, I mean just that we don't till. Our fields were laid out, you know, never been tilled, just pasture grasses. They were laid out by just piling on straw mulch onto the pasture grasses, like you guys can see in this photo here. I know that it's being blocked a little bit. So we would pile that on, and we would do that in like August, let's say, and let it break down the rest of the summer over the course of the winter, and come back next spring, open up planting holes like you see these little lettuces being popped into. And that's how it went at first. No water. And at first, when we would plant things like the lettuce heads, let's say, we would water in with we would water things in initially. So we had access to water at a rental house across the street. So we would lug water over and water each little lettuce head, you know, in just a little bit to get it going. And then it was on its own. I honestly, I can't believe we did all that. But needless to say, systems have evolved a lot. And today at Urbavore, we produce thousands of dollars worth of food literally every single week, year round, without the use of drip irrigation. Today we finally, as of 2 years ago, have a water line running down the middle of our farm that allows us to take hoses and at least water things in that way and spot water things. But our food is grown without irrigation, aside from, you know, a little bit of supplemental water. So you guys can see these no-till permanent raised beds. That's one feature that's really helped us deal with climate change and the fact that we have these crazy weather events. So, you know, on our farm, we'll go weeks and weeks without water, but when we get water, sometimes it's maybe a 10, 15-inch rainfall event. And so raising up our beds has created better drainage in those times. And, you know, we have heavy clay soil. This is more like farming in subsoil. So you know, clay does not drain well at all. So having that extra room for the drainage is paramount. But on the flip side, you know, if you have raised beds, well, guess what? They dry out faster too. So I'll talk a little bit later about how we're kind of mitigating the fact that our beds are bermed up. But all of our beds are permanent beds. We're never running tillers through them. We're just building on top of them every year, adding more organic matter and compost. We use silage tarps for occultation, but we also use silage tarps to preserve the moisture in the soil. So for instance, I might have a crop that was here before. Let's say this was a field of melons. After the melons are harvested, instead of like dragging all that plant matter out, I'm going to just throw a silage tarp on top of all of it. Okay. I'm going to let it break down for a few weeks. And ideally, I try to do this, let's say, after some sort of rain event. And what's going to happen under that tarp is it's going to break down all the crop debris. It's going to kill any weeds in the bed. It's going to maintain whatever moisture is under there. So again, if you do it right after a rain event, but you're not going to have rain for another month, you won't believe what it's like when you pull that tarp up in a few weeks. It'll be, you know, just moist, beautiful, perfect. The other thing that's going to happen under that tarp in that protected situation is it's going to enliven the microbiology as everything starts to break down. And again, when you pull that up, and let's say I'm going to plant a round of fall crops, let's say fall radishes and root vegetables are going in there, I'll pull that tarp up and I'll have melons broken down, weeds gone, soil alive, and I'll be able to take a furrow and, you know, just get right in there and direct seed my crops, cover them up, and they will even germinate without any rain, you know, assuming that the tarp did its job. So I'm actually not a fan of plastic at all. I'm not a fan of plastic mulch, but I believe silage tarps have a place in these no-till dry farming world because they can be used so strategically to hold moisture in and to kill, you know, crops or cover crops without the use of tillage. And the tarps can be used for, I mean, I have tarps that I've had for 15 years and they're still in my rotation. So I'm just handling them carefully and reusing them every year. We also use leaf mold and compost mulch on top of our beds, and this is particularly important. So compost is really, frankly, the biggest ingredient towards dry farming success, towards healthy soil, period. The more compost and organic matter you can layer onto your beds, the more your soil has the ability to not only effectively drain water in times of, you know, intense rainfall, but the water holding capacity of the soil just shoots up tenfold. So the more compost we use every year, each of my beds in every single field can go longer without actual rainfall. You know, I have crops that sometimes can go the entire, you know, through a 4-week stint of 100 degrees, not a drop of rain, and they're still producing, you know, better than folks I know who are on tilled soil with drip irrigation. So it's, I mean, it's seriously phenomenal. I'm not going to talk about these evolving systems. We actually use animals in our rotations as well. We raise hogs, we raise chickens, and they do play a part in all of this. But for the water piece specifically, we won't go into it. But no-till, essentially, the philosophy of no-till is to disturb the soil as little as possible, keep the soil covered as much as possible with compost, straw mulch, leaf mulch, organic matter, and keep the soil planted as much as possible. So, you know, we think about plants sucking out water from the soil, and so in our minds we're thinking, well, the more plants you have growing, right, the more they're drinking, and then the more water you need. That's not necessarily true if you are smartly cropping things within the right spacing, and keeping your beds planted with as many crops, as many companion flowers, as many beneficial flowers and herbs as possible. You can strike this beautiful balance of this thriving ecosystem where all of these plants are living symbiotically together and getting the amount of moisture that they need. You'll have these fungal relationships happening with the compost, which is building all this mycorrhizal community under the soil. And that mycorrhiza is creating these fungal strands that will reach, you know, I mean, they'll go hundreds of feet, they'll go a mile and find water and nutrients for those plants. So the, you know, what the soil microbiology needs is to be fed. So the more you have planted, the more the ground is covered, the more you're feeding those microbes and keeping them alive and keeping them working for you. So let's see if I have any examples of my beds with my many layers of crops. You know, in any, I don't think I have good pictures here, but in any given field at Urbavore today anyway, you will see, let's say, you know, you'll see rows of rainbow chard with nasturtiums in the middle with maybe dill on the shoulders. You'll see multiple crops growing together in unison in a single bed, and they're all producing at, you know, top yield. So let's see, one thing, you know, we did when we we created our permanent raised beds. We had been no-till from the start, but we had not initially had raised beds. We took the rotary plow attachment of a BCS walk-behind tractor, an expensive piece of equipment that we don't own. We borrowed it, kicked up the aisles, kicked up the soil in the aisles, and then I came back with a hoe and kind of took some of that kicked up soil and shaped the beds. And we did that about 3 years ago, and this has kind of been the state of our fields ever since. And since then, we just keep layering on the organic matter, which I talked about before, the compost, namely. And one thing that we found, it seems like just a little thing to mention, but one thing that has been incredible for us is, I don't know if you can see in this slide how this is a raised bed, but we've actually filled in the aisle with wood mulch. Wood mulch is not something that you would ever want to put on top of your vegetable crops in the actual bed, but it is incredible in the aisles. So by filling up our raised bed aisles with the wood mulch, we're mulching out the sides of those beds to keep the beds from drying out in times of drought. But B, this wood mulch, as it breaks down, is just the perfect fungal environment for the mycorrhiza fungi that you want, that is going to mine for your nutrients and find you water when the rain is not falling. So Asplund, the tree trimming company, will dump this stuff for free on your land. You can get unlimited amounts of free wood mulch, and you need to be putting it in your pathways. I know it doesn't seem like that has anything to do with climate resilient, drought tolerant, farming, but it absolutely does. Another tool that's been huge for us is this broad fork here. So in lieu of tilling, we are running a broad fork through all of our fields. Typically the way it goes is we put compost down, then we come through and we broad fork, then we furrow and we plant. This broad fork aerates the soil without the use of tillage, without churning up the soil and destroying the soil aggregates and the soil microbiology. And when you're broad forking and you're opening up those little, pathways in the soil, the compost is trickling down and getting down deeper where those, microbiology sort of communities will just explode, because the compost is just full of them. So again, this tool has been a lifesaver for us. And I'm actually seeing my beds even retain more moisture when I run a broad fork through them at the beginning of the season than if I don't. So also, you can always get creative with your mulches and your organic matter. These are spent mushroom blocks from a mushroom grower, and we'll spread them all in our fields and crumble them up, and they can add to that whole fungal community in the aisles of our beds. One thing that has enabled us to use this much compost, because compost isn't cheap. I probably use about $60,000 worth of compost a year. And I'm only able to do that because I produce the compost on our farm. Our sister business is Compost Collective KC. So we take in about 25,000 pounds of food scraps every single week from residents. And we compost those food scraps on site. We mix them with wood chips. We mix them with carbonous materials like leaf mulch. And the end result is the highest quality compost I've ever worked with in my life. And I'm getting paid to make it. So it's...
Thank you,
yeah.
Brooke, for
Yeah.
thank you, Brooke, for your strategies on water conservation.
Yes. Cut me off. I know I'm going.
But no, I know you're passionate about it. And I know if you're passionate about something, you can just easily go really deep in.
I don't know what my time limit is. You guys, I trusted you would cut me off when I needed to stop talking. Last thing I'll say, this book by Daniel Mays is kind of the Bible book we use for our no-till farming, and it obviously is going to talk a lot about these water conserving methods. So I recommend it to any urban growers.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Alana, I wanted to ask you as well, what methods are you using to conserve water on your farm?
Yeah. Well, I'm glad that Brooke was able to touch on so many different methods. I think the biggest one that we use over at Young Family Farm, we're also no-till, which Brooke talked about, and that one's important. So we're reducing the impact of, or really eliminating the impact of erosion in the soil. The other that we use that's a little bit different than Urbavore, we do actually use drip line irrigation as a water conservation method. For us, it was one, not sustainable. And then two, we felt like there was so much water waste with the previous method we were using, which is standing with the water hose and watering overhead. And because of our location, which is we're really, really in the center of the city in a high traffic sort of urban environment, we felt that that was going to be the best movement forward for us. We were successful in obtaining a grant, and I would recommend for farmers and growers who are potentially interested in running drip line irrigation at their farm site to consider applying for the KC Grow Grant. It's a partnership between the city of Kansas City and Kansas City Community Gardens, and I believe it's administered by Cultivate. I think that's their role and sort of how it works. But essentially, it provided a portion of the cost for us to actually tap into the city's water source. So we have, a water pump on site that taps into the city's water source. We can run our hosing for our drip line irrigation on our various locations. The challenge for us at our farm is we don't have one sort of large site like Brooke does over at Urbavore, or even Star and Anthony over at Global One. We have several sites that are spread out across about 2 blocks. And so we have to have, of course, water on each of those different locations. And so I think Young Family Farm presents sort of an illustration of various methods of water conservation and water usage. So in our main location, we have the drip line irrigation, which we talk about. Another sort of water conservation strategy is we use irrigation scheduling. So we don't keep the water on 24/7. We actually rotate the watering amongst the crops on a time schedule. And then some of our other locations where we don't actually have that water pump and the drip line irrigation installed, we do the old school rainwater. We collect rainwater. We put it in the rain barrels. We attach a hose. We drive those rain barrels over to the location, and we water overhead for those particular crops. Another thing that Brooke touched on in terms of water conservation, we also use mulch. So straw mulch, leaf mulch, and then in the aisles, as she does, we use wood mulch. A resource that I would highly recommend for farmers and growers, if they're interested in adding wood mulch, is connect with Chip Drop, which is a service that connects arborists to agriculturists and gardeners and growers. They will drop mulch for free at your site. When you incentivize them with a $20 tip, you are more likely to get that mulch in a more expedient amount of time. Or you can also do the approach, if you see someone cutting down the trees and trimming trees, you can flag them down and say, hey, by the way, my farm's down the way, you can drop it off there. So those are options. Something else that we're working on is doing cover crops in one of our other locations. And then, of course, trying to have drought resistant crops is always a good thing as a part of your overall sort of water conservation practices. So I think, I was taking notes over here. I think that covers most of what we do. We also use compost from various sources for our growing location. Mulch, I talked about drought resistant, cover crops, drip line irrigation and irrigation scheduling, and then rainwater conservation as well. So I think that covers it for us.
I think that's very interesting. One thing that I'm seeing between Brooke and you is organic material to the soil is kind of helping provide or mitigate some of that loss in water, or helping you conserve a lot more water in your garden bed. So that's very interesting. And I did not know Young Family Farm had multiple sites. So that's really cool as well.
Yeah, so a lot of folks think of our main site, which is on Wayne, which you can see very easily from 39th Street, but we actually have 4 sites in production and a 5th site that we're bringing in production here this spring into summer. So
that's amazing. That's amazing. So I think Star just joined. So I have a question for Star. Does water conservation impact the type of produce that you grow at your garden? She might be having technical difficulties.
Mm-hmm.
I am, but we can still you can probably still hear me.
We can still hear you.
Yeah.
I am here also with my husband, who's also the president of Global One Urban Farm, and his name is Anthony. So you heard Alana mention Anthony earlier.
Yes.
But I'll talk for a minute and then I'll have him finish up.
Yes, ma'am.
Go ahead and ask the question.
Oh yeah, what was the question again? I'm sorry.
No, the question is, does water conservation impact the type of produce that you grow at your garden?
Yeah, definitely. We've been affected here in Missouri the last probably 3 to 5 years with the weather extreme. We've had extreme drought and excessive heat in the summer months, and the winter months we've had excessive. I'm from Michigan, but this was the first time I've ever felt 30 below wind chill factors in the Midwest. It's been so extreme, both winter and summer, and so we've been trying to adapt to it. I'm adding heating and cooling climate to our greenhouse. We have a 20 by 50 greenhouse that we grow in all year round. We own 1.5 acres. We've been growing about 10 years, been established since 2016 as a nonprofit. And everything you all spoke of, we practice it or are about to put it in place, such as the drip lines instead of overhead watering. We already do composting. We already grow organic. We use chips and different things to add nutrients and develop the soil, chips, leaves. As I said, we do our own composting. So it's kind of having things prematurely ready for this, because like you said, it's so unpredictable, the weather. I mean, you can get flooding this year, you can get extreme heat this summer, you can get excessive winters. We're still in a drought. We just got rain here recently, but we were in a burn warning drought here again in Kansas City, because we didn't get any precipitation this winter. We really didn't have a winter in Missouri and Kansas City this year, so we haven't had any water established through nature. So everything that y'all said are great practices. We hope you all can come out and visit us. The gentleman from Florida, maybe you could come look at what we're doing. We've dealt with hydro before. We're really interested in all of the other style of growing, which is your upright and your geo is really, really interesting. And so, yeah, like I said, we had 1.5 acres. We grow, we try and practice everything you all are speaking on. And we produce all our vegetables and distribute them free, because we're in USDA defined food insecurity and 64128 zip codes. And so we're actually in a neighborhood that there was a gentleman there, Mr. Leon, that owned a Black-owned grocery store there for over 50 years. And he ended up losing his store for financial reasons. I think it's about $250,000 in debt. And he couldn't get any bailouts or anything. So we actually built 1.5 acres there, but he lost his store. I mean, so the demand for the food insecurity, sustainability, being able to produce thousands of pounds of vegetables is so needed now. I mean, it's like no matter how much we have to give away or grow, it's never enough. All of the churches are giving away food. All of the pantries are giving away food. And so, it's a dire need, because inflation has made it where the average family working person can't, the last 2-3 weeks of the month, they don't have enough money to purchase vegetables and things that they need. They can't go to Whole Foods. They don't look at getting carrots and heirloom tomatoes and buying arugula. And at the end of the month, these people standing in line getting food, they work every day, and so it's it's a thing for us. It's for large production, and we germinate and produce all our own plants. My wife and I, we can do 10,000 plants by ourselves, germinate, and have ready by springtime. So yeah, man, we appreciate the meeting and the info you all are sharing. So
more than anything, Mr. Anthony, we appreciate you. You, Alana, and Brooke are pillars in your community, and you're mitigating some of these issues in food insecurity as well as fighting climate change. So y'all are heroes in my regard. So
thank you.
So they go hand in hand.
They go hand in hand. That is funny. But so I appreciate we're going to move from the guided questions to some of the Q&A because I know the audience has some amazing questions. The first question I seen that I wanted to ask, and I think, let me see if it got answered. So I think Mr. Anthony touched on it briefly. It's someone have any of the panelists interacted with the FSA, Farm Service Agencies, or USDA to address climate mitigation on farms? And if I need to repeat that, I can again.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. You go ahead and I'll follow up in the rear.
Oh, no, I didn't know if he was speaking to me or not. No, you can go ahead. I'm sorry.
This is for anybody in the panel.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, Young Family Farm, we're enrolled in a program currently, and it's a grant-funded program through the USDA. It's called Climate Smart Fieldscapes. And essentially the objective, as I understand it, is to study farms, urban farms in particular, that are using climate smart practices and evaluate the effectiveness of those practices. And also hopefully encourage other folks on their farming locations to utilize some of those techniques that are climate smart. And that would include water conservation, but it's not limited to just that.
Okay.
And I would say,
Brooke, my fault.
Well, for newer growers or any growers really, there are a lot of programs through the NRCS that really want to address climate resilience in agriculture, especially in urban areas. So there is money out there to be had for these climate smart fieldscapes. And there's also a lot of support. I mean, you can work with a conservationist, kind of hand in hand on your farm and help develop a plan for a climate smart field. And it's, honestly, it's just a matter of like digging and finding these opportunities, but they definitely exist.
Okay. Thank you for answering that question. I didn't know if Mr. Anthony wanted to have a question as well. I think this question might be directed for Dr. Dorsey. It says, how do the impacts or climate impacts of the manufacture of the infrastructure required for high-tech vertical farming systems balance with any benefits to the system in terms of the climate? That was kind of wordy. I don't know. If I need to repeat it, I can as well.
Yeah, the thing about I guess, hydroponics and vertical farming is that it does take a large investment initially, and it's something that needs to be monitored. But over time, it sort of pays for itself because what we just talked about, the unpredictability of climate, of precipitation, sun's, erosion of soil and so forth. And so, like I said, I don't want to say that we shouldn't or will never have like rural farming. That's great to have that. But because that is so uncertain now, the payoff is that you can maybe have the food be produced quicker all year round. For example, seasonal change can inhibit certain crops. If it's done within the controlled environment, greenhouse, warehouse, whatever, shipping containers, you can recirculate the water so there's less evaporation. The plants grow faster because the root structure soaks up the nutrients. Like within soil, they have to sort of leach it out, pull out the nutrients out of the soil. It's the difference between trying to eat a steak and eat a steak with a fork or drinking a protein shake. One can get into your protein and get to your body quicker. So the plants can, and also, like I said, it's a faster yield all year round, protected from pests. You don't have to worry about something coming in, flying in to eat your crops up, vandalism, people stealing it, So there's a lot of benefits. It has to be monitored, obviously, because if your electricity goes down, your pumps and valves stop working, all of a sudden everything may die, or if you get some contamination, since it is kind of a monoculture, the crops can still maybe fail. So it's not, a solution that's, foolproof, but it's more of a supplement that I think because of climate change, we probably will have to start producing food inside more. And of course it can be, the light source can be LED lights, doesn't have to be sunlight. You can power it with energy, solar, renewable energy. So there's, it's a mixed bag, basically.
Got you. Thank you for your response. Brooke, I have a question for you. So Rebecca asked, did you have to battle Bermuda grass when you got started? And do you still face that? What would you advise any new farmer?
Yeah, if you're no-till, and even if you till, I mean, honestly, Bermuda grass is rough. We were lucky on our site that we didn't have much Bermuda grass. We have other things like field bindweed that is god awful too, but not like Bermuda grass. If you are on a site with Bermuda grass, you need to tarp it for at least 2 years. And I mean like with a big old silage tarp, and keep it on there for 2 years. And then when you are ready to plant in it, you need to be really, aggressive about dealing with any Bermuda grass that may be coming in, encroaching from the sides and finding its way into your beds. You're just going to have to keep up some really good weed management at first. Of course, mulches and compost are going to help you with that. But yeah, in a perfect world, I don't recommend farming on a site with Bermuda grass. But if that's what you've got, long-term tarping will kill it. But it's a minimum of 2 years.
Got you. Thank you for your response, Brooke. So we got time for 2 more questions. So I don't know if this is a Dr. Dorsey. Anyone can answer this question. It's, can aeroponics support tuber crops?
Not really. There are limitations to. I think there's something called like a Dutch barrel system where you can grow tubers in it. It's I'm not an expert on it, but it's not. It's kind of like hydroponics, but it's different. It's something that's contained. But normally, when you're talking about real hydroponics or aeroponics, we're talking about green leafy vegetables, and root crops do kind of need like soil. That's kind of the thing. They do need some kind of medium like soil. But lettuce, spinach, you can do other things, squashes. There's a lot of things that can be done hydroponically. But when it comes to, like you said, the root crops, that's where, and also grains too. It's much more difficult to grow, wheat and corn and those type of things hydroponically. So really, hydroponics is more for fresh leafy vegetables, tomatoes, strawberries, things like that. But it's not for everything.
If I just want to say one thing about hydroponics, I think it's important for people to remember that a lot of hydroponic systems rely on liquefied chemical nutrients. So they're not necessarily organic systems. And I just think we need to be careful in the age of climate change that our climate resilient solutions also don't bring more climate problems with them too. So hydroponics can be done organically, but it typically is not. So I think vertical farming and those systems, there's definitely a place for them, but wherever possible, I think we get creative and grow in the ground if we can. There's certainly cities where that's not a possibility. So I think we need all those things. But I do think that hydroponics and some of the vertical farming takes a lot of resources to get off the ground,
It does, and it can fail. Yeah, I think what worries me also is that, a lot of the salts that are used, part of it is phosphorus. Phosphorus, like you said, phosphates and stuff, which is also limited. So how long can we even do this system without the nutrients being exhausted? So you're right. It's not the total solution. I look at it as a supplemental solution.
As a part of it, yeah.
Part of it, yeah.
So it looks like we're almost out of time. I thought we could get to that last question, but it's completely fine because the information that you guys gave us today, from all the panelists to our keynote speaker, I appreciate the gems that you said today, that you gave everyone in the audience and in Zoom land. So more than anything, if you're in Zoom land, give our panelists and our keynote speaker a round of applause right now. I know everyone's giving a round of applause, even though we can't see them. But no, more than anything, I appreciate everyone's time for coming in and coming to our Gaining Ground webinar series. Hopefully we see you at the next one in May. Please tune in and look out for a flyer. Once again, thank everybody for coming on, whether that's Zoom land or our panelists and our keynote speaker. And I hope everyone has a wonderful and blessed day.
You too. Take care.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Thank you.